This is the Tea Mind with me, Erica Moore. It's a space to slow down, step out of the noise, and see things a little more clearly. Some episodes are conversations around the moment that something clicked and what changed afterwards. Others are short clarity sessions, a few minutes where we sip tea together so we can come back to ourselves and think clearly in the middle of a full day. Because when the usual pace stops working and everything starts to feel a little bit unclear, the answer is rarely more information. It's usually a little more attention. A chance to pause and to see what's been overlooked, and to create enough space for clarity to find you. So welcome back to this week's episode of The Tea Mind, and I'm really excited to have Sarah Robertson with me today. Sarah is the writer behind This Creative Life on Substack and a brand designer and creative mentor at Fawn, where she collaborates with clients to really get clear on their vision and craft really beautiful visuals and discover their true voices. And though each business she works with is unique, they all share a common thread, and that's a belief that their work can make a difference. And she's really passionate about helping them embody their spirit and their story. So Sarah is originally from Edinburgh, but she now lives in the Scottish borders. So Sarah, welcome to the Tea Mind podcast.
Hello, Erica. Thanks so much for having me.
How are you today?
Good. Yeah, fairly rested. I made sure I had an early night last night because I knew this was coming up. But yeah, there's been a lot of late nights and a lot of busyness lately within my work and life. But yeah, feeling pretty calm today, which is nice.
That's good. More calm than me. It's we were just talking about the end of term, and I think you've still got a week after this one, but this is the last week of our school term here, and yeah, lots of things happening, school shows and parties and whatnot. So
I know it's a big juggle, isn't it? And I've got one in primary school and one in nursery, so very different needs and schedules. But yeah, the eldest, she's going off to high school after the summer, so it feels like there's this kind of like extra, I don't know, extra rush to get to the end of the year, but equally cram lots of things in and celebrate them, but also make sure everything's tied up. So yeah, lots to think about.
yeah, I've got one at the same stage, just leaving primary school. Yeah. So yes, always the juggle. So perhaps we can get on to that as we kind of talk through your story. But yes, where does your journey start? Where would you like to start?
Well, I suppose one of the one of the questions you'd asked was around, a pivot point, I guess, a threshold in my life where I felt a change was needed or some kind of shift in a new direction, when that realization was. And I think for me, there probably wasn't a firm realization. I think it was kind of like a development over time, probably over years, in fact. But I think for me, the real shift in how I wanted to work came when I had my daughter. And that was just over 11 years ago now. Because, yeah, I distinctly remember during pregnancy checking out of work a few months before she arrived, kind of wrapping things up for maternity leave. And then, of course, lots then happened between then and returning to work, those early days of motherhood. But I think for me, the interesting thing was a shift in values, and what I thought was important before was no longer important now. And when I came back to work after maternity leave, there was an ongoing running joke in the studio that I'd never actually come back. And in some ways, I think that was true, because I think I left a completely different version of myself behind. So yeah, maybe that's a place to start, seeing as we've talked a little bit about kids and
Yeah.
needs.
So tell me a little bit about that time then before you had your first child. What did your life look like then? What were you doing on an average day?
So I started my business back in 2005, my first studio, and my then partner came on board about 4 years later, and then a few years after that, we acquired another studio, because we were looking to grow the business, and we had two choices. You could either, find the work to fund the hiring of the people, um, or we could find the people and then look for the work. And then an opportunity presented itself that enabled us to do both eventually. And so we took that on in 2012 and merged those businesses. And it was a fun time, it was an exciting time, but it was a demanding time. Um, I think for me, there was often a focus on money and more, believing perhaps that that would give me some of the security that I was seeking behind the scenes. But also, there was a real energy behind it. I'd always been was quite ambitious and a bit of a go-getter. Um, and I loved working with a team to a point. I think for me, the challenges came with the lack of creativity. I felt that my role started to shift more towards managing people and sometimes difficult situations, having tricky conversations. And that started to kind of take over the joy of actually making. And so working on branding and design projects and websites was something that we did day to day, but I started to feel quite hands off in the process and found that a little bit tricky. There was parts of it that were certainly very rewarding, and as a team, we did have a lot of fun for a few years. But when I fell pregnant with my daughter, which was a bit of a surprise, I have to say, because I had anticipated that I would have fertility struggles, and I did have fertility struggles after she was born, um, in terms of, having another child, that wasn't a straightforward path, but with my first, um, it was kind of quite sudden. And I was a few months into the pregnancy when I found out. Um, I'd very much been in the depths of kind of like running the business, keeping things going, working very much around the clock. Work was kind of life. And at that point, I think I just turned 30, and yeah, I feel like there was just this dramatic shift for me, not just in terms of becoming a mother, but it really threw a lot into the air, around how I was not just working, but how I was living. And so I suppose that takes us up to that point where things started to shift a little for me. And I think I just used to have this almost like full bodily sensation of no, to certain things, certain decisions. I wasn't really happy about some of the choices that were being made in the business when I was on maternity leave. And while some aspects of the studio were running smoothly, I was a little bit concerned about the direction it was going in. Um, and when I came back to work, about a year later, I think for me, there was just a real struggle to kind of slide back into it. I mean, I was grateful to have that time off, to have built a business that, gifted me that time with my daughter. But um, yeah, it was a very different kind of business when I came back to it. And I was very different too. I just feel like we'd kind of outgrown each other, maybe is the best way of explaining it. Um, and so yeah, that's kind of where I found myself when I came back to work.
Wow. So that's a really huge turning point that you're describing when you've gone from that time when work was life, that was everything, you're sort of all encompassing. And then you discover you're having a child and you've got that year away from work. Yeah.
Mm.
Tell me more about that. You said you were sort of looking to grow and it was all about money and more and trying to get that sense of security. Tell me more about that.
So it's an interesting one. I remember quite distinctly having a meeting with someone, not a client, more of a kind of collaborator, someone who I'd met through a business organization that we were both members of. And I remember him asking me um, about whether I was thriving or whether I was surviving. Um, and I remember feeling quite uncomfortable. You know in yourself when there's something, in your heart that's not quite working for you or not quite right. Um, it's not something I really was in a place to admit to myself then, but I remember just feeling a little bit shaky and nervous in that conversation and unsure about how to respond. I think because some of the questions he was asking me were kind of new to me. And he'd also asked me, about my definition of success, what success felt like. And I found it really hard to look beyond the material. I remember like instinctively feeling like success would be, you know, having a big house and a garden in the car and, you know, the things that you're able to afford yourself, I suppose, when you're running, a successful business or, what might be deemed financially a successful business. So I remember kind of being challenged on that in that conversation. And I think that planted a few seeds for me. But this is going back to kind of like my mid 20s. And, I started my business when I was 21. So I was so young. And um, very much kind of like shaped by my own experiences. I had, a brother in business. My dad had been in business, and I guess I seemed to have some of the energy and enthusiasm they had for these kinds of things. But I'd also spent quite a few years from leaving school to starting my business trying to keep up with other folk. I'd gone into work um, at 17 and was working within a marketing team. And I remember finding it hard to, relate to those around me because I was the youngest on the team by quite a few years. And I remember kind of, yeah, just trying to achieve what everyone else was trying to achieve in their lives there. And it was a tough one. I was kind of in a situation that I couldn't really afford to be in. When it came to Fridays after work and that kind of thing. So I suppose I always felt like I was kind of catching up in a way. And I guess that influenced some of that ambition when I decided to start out on my own. Um, but what was interesting, and the reason I mentioned that kind of conversation I had in my mid 20s is because it's really in stark contrast to how I feel now, which is less about having things and that being a marker of success and more about, the time I get to spend with my kids to do the things I love, to focus on the projects that I'm working on now, having that time and space to nourish my creativity. And of course, my turnover and profit's important, but it's not the goal. It's not the thing. It's just part of running a business. And the life goals I have feel more strong to me. I feel like I can sort of bind myself to them more than I do the work goals, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. This seems to be a theme that keeps coming up as well, is that redefining that definition of success that we've been sort of spoon fed.
Mhm.
And however people get to it on this messy journey of life, it's really recreating what makes you happy and what gives you that balance, that creativity, whatever you're trying to make up in your own life. So yeah, it's super interesting. And I wonder, during that year out that you had on maternity leave, then you've mentioned that your values changed. Yeah, tell me more about that time and yeah, what sort of shifted for you during that year?
Yeah, I think it was a time really where, I mean, maybe rather than values changing, and I know I said that, I think it's maybe more about connecting with what they really were, like what mine were, because when we are sort of chasing that success or what we think is success, it's often someone else's version of it, isn't it? Or society's version of it, or the workplace's version of it. Um, what was quite good for me in that time, although it was hard, um, was, facing the realization that what I was building wasn't really for me. Was it really sustaining me in all the ways, creatively, not just financially. And I think for me, that was the big shift. It was an interesting one because we probably had our best year financially before we went on maternity leave. And yeah, I felt quite stressed, probably quite hollow. It was like the things that really mattered to me hadn't quite come to the fore yet. And it's funny how I think having a child or just having a big change like that in your life, it doesn't necessarily need to be motherhood. It might just be someone new comes into your life that challenges you to think or feel a different way. But for me, that was definitely my daughter. There was the sense of responsibility I felt towards her, but also, um, my own wants and needs. And, was I feeling nourished? Was I feeling supported in what I was doing? Um, yeah, it was an interesting one and probably one of the kind of like early indicators that myself and my then partner weren't quite on the same page, although it would take a long time for us to, you know, appreciate that, accept that, and our differences. And, it took me a few years to decide ultimately to step away from the business that we were running together. Um, I almost couldn't even give a really good reason for for stepping away. It was all based on a feeling that I'm just not doing what feels aligned. And that was tricky. There was a lot of kind of stories I told myself and felt like I'd failed in business, felt like I'd failed us and our relationship because couldn't carry on in the way that I guess I felt I should or was expected to. And I guess that's where the sort of values come into play. I really did start concentrating a bit more closely on, well, what kind of brand and business do I want to develop? What do I want that to stand for? What do I want the day to day to look like and feel like? That's kind of where I found myself when I was, pondering that return to work. And it was a challenging time on maternity leave too. I feel that some of the mental health struggles that I experienced went some way to influencing the decisions I later made. For the first time, in a long time, I sat down regularly to speak with a therapist about how I was feeling and what life might look like for me when I returned to work. So it was yeah, it was it was a lot. It's even just sort of I can almost like feel it all like talking about it, I can almost like feel myself back there and the pressure and the juggle because of course I was new to motherhood as well and all of that. But also new to this feeling of I want more from my work. I want to feel more joy from it. And that went, I suppose, hand in hand with a lot of the feelings I wanted from my life as well. So I guess that's why it was such a big turning point for me because while I didn't make a lot of drastic changes then, it certainly signaled that it was probably a good idea to.
And would you say you've always been quite good at leaning into your feelings and listening to your body and trusting that sort of gut instinct?
Not always, definitely not. I think for me, and I think for a lot of people actually, that ability to kind of like tune into your body and how you feel, often comes on the back of burnout or having experienced, a significant and life-changing event. And that was certainly the case for me. I think for a long time, I would override my feelings. My boundaries were loose, if they existed at all. It was very much about people pleasing. My tendencies to people please were, you know, yeah, just they were dictating, many areas of my life. Um, and so for me, I was always kind of energized, but in some ways running on empty. And I think I got to a point where it just wasn't sustainable anymore. And when I had therapy for postnatal depression, after having my daughter, which was about 4 months when I was diagnosed, um, that experience just taught me so much. I remember picking up a pen and paper again and getting back to journaling, which I hadn't done for years. I hadn't written for the longest time. And writing in my teenage years had been quite an important thing for me, just in terms of expressing myself. And so there was that kind of like invitation back to the page again, just to get everything out of my head and onto paper and to figure things out. And yeah, it's been years, I think, since I'd done anything like that, really sat down and engaged with what I needed and what I wanted. Um, and it took practice, it took time for me to really lean into that, years and years. I think my whole 30s actually has just been about, you know, reconnecting with my body and learning to trust it again and trust myself. And I feel like at 42, I'm getting there now. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I do feel like any changes for me have not necessarily been sudden. There's been a kind of build up to them.
So yeah, so journaling and sort of giving yourself almost permission to get back to writing. It sounds like that helped to sort of bring back your creativity. What other sorts of things were helping you during that time?
I think, getting out in nature. I remember just walking everywhere with her, just for miles and miles and miles. And she was only ever asleep in her buggy. So certainly in those early months, it was like twice a day getting out and about. And I know it's a bit of a cliche, I suppose, but connecting with nature, being outdoors, no- that movement, as well as just getting the fresh air and just being able to process thoughts and feelings, was really helpful for me. Um, and I did a lot of yoga, in the early years, of motherhood. I spend quite a bit of time with Cora, um, just moving together and having fun together. And yeah, there were lots of really nice moments of connection, which I think came through movement and nature primarily, and journaling as well. Certainly a really helpful time for me in terms of getting out of what felt like something of a creative rut.
So then you sort of move away from the agency life and set up on your own, and you've said in some of your writing that um, yeah, it was looked like a bad decision on paper, but yeah, it was something that you really felt like you had to do.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when I decided to move away from the business, and it actually took me 5 years to make that decision. So I went back to work after my daughter was born, and I think almost carried on in a state of being an autopilot, perhaps. I was just going through the motions, and um, it was very clear that that was the case, to other people. I find it quite difficult to sort of shield how I'm feeling. And as hard as I tried to just kind of get on with things and get through the days, it was dampening my spirit because I felt like I was just reacting all the time. The kinds of projects we worked on had become mainly digital. So we were working on websites for various organizations, and the relationships with those clients were tricky at points as well. Quite demanding, quite a lot of last minute requests, urgency. And I'm somebody who lives with this kind of like low level of anxiety kind of running through my days anyway, which I can manage pretty well. But when other people are putting their shit on you, if I can say that,
Yeah.
sort of adds to it. Becomes a bit of a cycle, and then suddenly you're not just managing your own stress, you're managing other people's. Is my website going to launch? When are you going to change this? When are you going to add that? And these were big projects, and some of them quite unwieldy, and would go on for some time. And I'm like probably one of life's starters and not the best finisher. So I'm very excited in the early stages of a project, like mood boarding, color palettes, the ideation, a little bit of the putting things in place, and taking the action. But when it comes to the end, I'm very much driven by a deadline. It's like there's got to be something like that in the last minute rush at the end to get things over the line. I'm not one of these, you know, I'm organized to a point, but very much like a last minute energy when it comes to finishing something off. And that's just how it's always been for me. It's worked. But I think when that last minute energy is coming from the clients you're working with around you and your team, and you're trying to keep everybody happy and you're unhappy, it's just very um unfulfilling. And I suppose that's how I felt, was that I really needed to tap back into that sense of fulfillment again. Where am I going to get that from? So I used to do quite a lot of side projects. Like I'd do things on the side, and I would really people because I'd be like, oh, idea for a project. And, I'd be doing some charity thing or some collaborative thing with other designers. And for me, that's what created a sense of, connection and belonging around my business. Also a bit of fun for the team too. We would work together on these projects and, that would, reignite that enthusiasm again. Um, and that was fine for a few years, right up until the pandemic. And it was in 2020, I furloughed myself mainly because I was homeschooling a primary one. And I remember having a few podcast conversations, like my first ever podcast conversation with someone on their podcast, and almost having like an epiphany moment, like just the years and years of energy I'd been sort of behind this decision, I think, but this feeling of, I think I need to do something new. And that was kind of mid 2020. And by the end of that year, I'd said to my business partner and life partner at the time, I want to set up something new. I want to just focus on branding. I want to focus on identity design. I don't want to do websites anymore. I don't want to manage big clients. I want to work with small businesses. And so I knew what I wanted. I couldn't quite figure out how I was going to make it work financially. And that did cause some upset. But I was fairly certain by that point, having tried to re-engage and carry on as I was. Yeah, I was ready for that shift really. So by the end of 2020, I'd set up a branding studio. These are the days, and I ran that business for 5 years, and I'm really grateful to that business because I feel like it gave me the opportunity to explore new ways of working and living, and it it introduced me to people who shared in my values and where there was a mutual support for each other. There was some reciprocity there. You weren't slaving away for someone, which was occasionally what it felt like before. And I just enjoyed that feeling of partnership that I built with the clients that I worked with. And I guess starting to feel a lot of joy in my life for the first time. One of the biggest things for me, I think, that kind of showed me I'd made the right decision. Because there had been a lot of questions around, well, how's this going to work? Because it's not going to make as, much money as the previous company. But the big difference between the clients is that my small business clients at These Are the Days were more often than not paying me immediately. Our
Yeah.
clients at the other business where we'd be sending huge invoices, sometimes for 10 times as much as what I was billing my clients. We could sometimes be waiting up to 3 months to have paid or more. There was it was a tricky one. Um, but I just felt quite galvanized, I suppose, by the fact that my clients were supporting me as much as I was supporting them. And in all honesty, I don't think I'd really felt that before.
Mm.
And I think some of that is on me. You know, I've I've got to take responsibility for the culture of a studio that I've built. I've got to take responsibility for the kinds of clients that we attract and work with. And it wasn't all bad. It was just energetically not right.
Yeah.
Um, and I did work on some brilliant projects over those years, which I really enjoyed, but it wasn't enough to outweigh the the difficulties that came with running that studio and having a team, I think, as well. So people had slowly started to leave the studio as we approached kind of like 2020. And that was just, they'd been there for a few years, but, someone wanted to focus on a different kind of web development that we weren't doing. Another was ready to step up, and there was nowhere for them to go within the studio. Um, and I think our final team members departed maybe 20, 2022, perhaps. So yeah, it was strange to kind of almost let go of studio life as it was, but I think they're working with me and just having me in the studio.
And that moment, it sounds like when you were like during COVID and you were on that podcast, it sounded you got real clarity around that moment that this was something you had to do, you had to make this shift. What was that feeling like?
Young, I think. Yeah. Yeah, I remember the conversation so clearly. And it was like you say, there was that clarity, but also a sense of direction. And on the back of that came momentum. And I think I felt excited again. There was that sense of possibility. And because I had been furloughed, there was not a lot, but there was some time for me to explore what that might look like. And it was probably the November, I think, of that year before I made the final choice to step away. And it was very much a sidestep. I didn't, you know, completely move away from the business. I still had involvement with some clients, and it took time for me to step away completely. Um, but yeah, I think there was a kind of tapping into that sense of joy again, and that passion was there. And what I wanted to bring to projects, I was kind of feeling like I could bring to my own, like my own business.
Yeah.
Uh, I'd been striving for so long to kind of support others in their businesses and with their brands and their websites. It was just kind of nice to experiment a little and play with ideas and see where they took me, until the point at which it felt like I could actually do this.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
It feels like the fact that you've been through this whole experience and really learnt to trust your feelings and trust your gut instinct and lean into your values and your vision, that whole journey you've been on, it seems to me that that helps you do what you do for your clients now, which that's like your superpower, gives you that real edge.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's definitely something in that, and in a lot of the relationships I have with clients, there is a mentoring element to the work that I do as well. When I started that brand studio 5 years ago, one of the things I really wanted to do was not just do design work for clients, but I wanted to support them, one to one with their own strategy, with their storytelling. And so over time, um, started to develop kind of packages where we'd maybe have like 6 sessions, one session a month over 6 months to help them bring a particular project to life. Because for me, when working with my clients, it's not always about design. It's often about how they feel about creating that business and launching that business and running it. The energy they bring to it. Um, I felt for me when I was, say, just working on an identity project, and I say just like that because an identity project is important in and of itself, but that strategy piece before and the storytelling piece after is important too. Making sure a client has the tools that they need to market their business, to feel good about their business, feel proud of it and want to share But equally, I think knowing they're worthy of sharing, and that's where the storytelling piece comes in, is kind of tapping into the fact that actually I've got something worth sharing here. And, you know, these little stories do matter. And, my why, why I'm in business and why I do what I do. And, it might seem small to me, but actually, it can have an impact on other people. And I say that for each of my clients as well, because I see them doing amazing things and not always wanting to or feeling like they can talk about that. So yeah, it's been quite fulfilling, I think, to step into a role that's not just about design, but it feels more holistic in a way.
Yeah.
I'm careful to say I'm not a coach, and sometimes I have to say I'm not a therapist. Um, but that mentoring role of really helping somebody, fall in love with what they do and share it with other people is a very rewarding part of my work. And I think that in turn influences the writing that I do. Because like a couple of years ago, um, I'd been blogging for a while, I'd been sending emails for a while, and I just felt like, I want to get paid to write. So I started doing some essays and articles for online publications, and then had some work appear in print. And I think that kind of like seeded that enthusiasm for bringing all the facets of my creative life together. Like, yeah, I can be a designer, I can also support people, and I can write. And that's why I decided to launch a new studio this year, mainly with a focus on storytelling, because I feel like that brand storytelling aspect really covers it all. It's like the umbrella for um, all the other aspects of branding. And it's feels like a good home to me anyway for the design, the mentoring, and the writing work that I do.
And that's Studio Fawn now.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I understand that's a Gaelic word, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And my dad was from the Isle of Lewis, so I've always felt a connection to the Outer Hebrides and spent a lot of time there. I'm actually heading back up in a couple of weeks for the first time in a long time. But yeah, the word fawn really came about towards the end of last year. Um, Myself and my partner separated, so last year was a difficult one. It was a tough one. A lot of big decisions were made, which I won't go into, but I think sharing that, is a big part of why I decided to start from scratch again. Um, I feel like the studio that I was running for the past 5 years served me well, but it didn't really encompass everything that I wanted or needed it to. And again, it just came back to a feeling. I just had this sense of, I feel like I just need some newness. I need to start over. Um, there was a kind of energy of closing off things that weren't for me towards the end of last year. And then when I entered this year, um, wanting to start anew. So yeah, I'd registered the company in December, knowing that I would launch it at some point publicly in the coming months. So yeah, it was just a few months ago that I shared the new studio name and that shift. Um, and yeah, it's been interesting. It's different, because I'm trying to focus on everything from a storytelling perspective. But that feels a lot more me, for this chapter in life.
Yeah.
I think maybe the recent years have been about just kind of proving to myself that I can run a small business on my own and that can fulfill me and support me and also support my family. And, it's not easy work. There's a lot going into building the foundations of the studio this year. So it's quite a trying time, but I'm enjoying it as well. I'm enjoying the the kind of brick by brick building of everything and sharing it and just seeing what comes next really.
It's really good to sort of hear somebody taking on all these challenges and not being afraid to make changes and constantly develop and grow, because things change all the time. We as people change and circumstances come up that are beyond our control. And I think it almost comes back to that definition of success. A lot of the time we can sort of be scared to make change
Mm.
for like, what will people say, or we should or shouldn't. There's lots of shoulds sort of that can come up. So I think the fact that you can sort of keep changing and developing and growing is really good. And yeah, it's really inspiring for others, I think, to see that if something's kind of niggling and not sitting 100% right with you, like, it's okay to give yourself permission to just step back and actually listen, feel what you're feeling and listen to what your inner voice is sort of trying to tell you, and then take action. And yeah, it's scary and it's hard, sort of feels like you're starting again all the time, even though you're not, because you're building on all these years of experience and all these lessons that you've learned.
Yeah.
And then you've talked a lot about helping other people find their voice. What's been the most sort of, how have you gone about finding your voice? And I know you've just pre-launched a book as well, and you've had all sorts of things. You've had was it brand seasons, the deck, and so on. So how have you gone about finding your voice in all of this?
I think one of the things about uncovering your brand voice is that it's not something you do before a launch. It's not something you do before you contact your first client or pitch to people or launch your first product. I think it's something that's cultivated over time and can evolve over time. Um, and for me, it's very much in the doing, and in the taking action and the trying new things, seeing what works, accepting when something doesn't, even if you feel a bit silly. There's lots of things I've done over the years that have just flopped. And that's it's not always been easy, but I've been able to maybe learn from those experiences or find ways of turning what on paper doesn't look so great into something that actually has worked for me or influences something else, Um, because we'll always take wrong turns and go down wrong paths, won't we? And I think there's a lot to be said for resilience and steadfastness and being able to acknowledge that and take whatever the learning is and do something with whatever we've gained, because we'll always gain something from these experiences. And I think brand voice is often cultivated in sharing these things, writing about these things. A lot of voice is wrapped up in a brand's or a person's, personality and character, um, but also in, how we do things and how we react to things, how we get back up again and keep moving forward. And certainly for me, I've always been quite open. I don't share everything that goes on behind the scenes in my life and work, but I'm not afraid to talk about some of the tougher moments or things that have challenged me because I also think they're the things that have shaped me. They've given me, um, you know, they've been character shaping, I suppose. Um, I hope that kind of answers the question. I feel like with brand voice, it's such a tricky one because it's very abstract, and a lot of branding is. A lot of it's not a one size fits all or a here's the steps you need to take to do this. I think design can be, but and strategy to a degree as well, but the storytelling side of it, you're appealing to people's emotions and feelings. And it's about being true to you. And I think a lot of brand voice is about stripping away the stuff that's not you or the shoulds, as you said.
Yeah.
It's getting back to the core of who you are, what you do, why you do that, um, and being able to share that in a way that connects with others, and creates a sense of belonging around, your business or your creative practice, whatever it might be.
And how much of that is shaped by the founder or the creative person themselves rather than the business as a whole?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think because, for me, even working in a branding role, I feel it's something I'm challenged by often. And there will be times where I think, oh my goodness, how can I possibly advise somebody on this when I'm struggling with it myself? Um, but when you're doing your own thing, it's inherently difficult. When you're the copywriter writing your own words, when you're the marketer doing your own marketing, when you're the kind of, I don't know, for me, a strategist creating my own strategy even for the launch of my book was quite hard,
Yeah.
to make decisions about. Um, but I do think it starts with you. Um, and I think if you can really get down into your vision for your business and your brand and build that around your values, that is what's going to result in a stronger voice. If you're building your business from a place of should or people pleasing or what other people expect or what you think other people want. And of course, what your audience wants and needs is important, but it's got to come from what you enjoy doing. What's life giving for you, I suppose. And then certainly in my practice, I find that when I'm running my business that way, it gives other people permission, and not that they need it, but a lot of people do, sadly,
Yeah.
permission to do the same.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
and I do think there's something about when you build a business around your heart work and around your kind of true brand spirit and brand story. I think brands and businesses have a way of running with that themselves. They almost, they'll take on a life of their own if you have embodied these things. But yeah, that's why I always think the groundwork's very important. It's easy to leap into, I want a logo, but actually there's so much groundwork to be done before that. I mean, I didn't even think about a typeface or colors or anything for Fawn probably until about February time. I spent months and months thinking about the real core of the business, what my offerings were, how I was going to connect with people in a way that felt true to me, but good for them. And it's still a work in practice. I think the other thing is you can't perfect things. You've got to just begin and roll with it because you can tweak as you go along. I think brand is a living, breathing thing. It's in constant motion. Whether you're tweaking parts of your identity, whether you're reworking your strategy, whether you're thinking about what to share next, how to show up. You're always, shifting and shaping it, in my view.
And just to go back to fawn as well, I think it's got a Gaelic meaning. How much does that play into your whole ethos?
Yeah, so I've been looking at a few different words and I was almost settled on another one altogether, but there was a slight issue with pronunciation of that word. Um, and when I came across fawn, I don't know, there was just something about it that just felt really good. And the meaning of it's got many resonant meanings, but for me, um, it's about rhythm, it's about movement. It also means place or land. And I think that sense for me of some of the work I do, particularly my writing being rooted in nature, it felt relevant, fitting for lots of different reasons. It also means melody and song, and I think as somebody who's always had quite a passion for music, and we've not touched on that, but it's something that's quite close to my heart, and so all the different meanings of it felt quite personal to me, but also something that would be relevant for a business, particularly when it comes to, cyclical living and working and the kind of themes that I explored in my brand seasons method, which then became the brand seasons play deck. And I'm about to release the playbook, which is like a digital journal and workbook. And there's a little family of things that have kind of grown around that idea. And so Fawn felt like a really nice home for all of that.
Yeah, I love that, how it all sort of ties together. And yeah, Gaelic words can be quite useful for
Yeah.
that. I'm interested just how that sort of rhythm and movement and sort of the whole working with the seasons, how that sort of plays out for your clients, and then how that has sort of come into being in the book that you're launching.
hmm Yeah, so it was a few years ago when I started writing on Substack. I remember feeling like if I'm going to start writing in this space, which seemed quite exciting at the time, um, I need to have a real purpose for showing up there and sharing something. I didn't want it to be another blog or another email newsletter. And I was also very mindful of protecting my existing business and the email newsletter I was sending through that. I've always kept that separate and have continued to. Um, it just feels a bit too risky to put everything into Substack for me personally, but it does work for some people in terms of simplification and their working rhythm. So yeah, I decided, I think I might start writing about this brand seasons idea that I've been playing with, and I'd registered the trademark, and I had an idea that I might launch a product and a service around it. But it was in its infancy, so it was very much in the ideation phase. And what was quite nice about that, and I think this kind of speaks to what you were asking about brand voice, is that I decided to just take people along that journey with me. My so I was in late pregnancy at that point. My son's just turned 3. So I think it was a month before he was born. I decided to set it up. I remember at the time, what am I doing? I'm supposed to be resting. But it is funny how that stage and even early motherhood, I think, can kind of, for some of us, there's this almost like a creative rebirth or something, whether it happens at the time or happens later. But certainly for me, I just felt quite emboldened to play around with this idea. And I thought, well, if I'm going to be on maternity leave for a little while, maybe it'll be nice to kind of build this out, see where it goes, and then if it's got legs, I can run with it when I come back to work. And so I started developing this idea of branding through the seasons. You've got the season of sowing, which is linked with strategy and all about cultivation and sowing those seeds. You've got the season of blossoming, which ties in with summer and is more about showing up and sharing and visibility. Um, so, like for me, at the moment, I'm kind of in almost like a micro summer season with sharing more about my book, which I'll come back to in a second. Then you've got the season of harvesting, which is really about, reaping what you sow, but that's tied in with that kind of like storytelling phase. And I suppose it's almost like a celebratory time as well. It's like you're
Mm.
coming to the conclusion of a cycle, and then you've got the bright bit, which is it's about this ties in with winter, but I think it's also a time where it's quite good to experiment, play with ideas, think about your vision, think about what's next, something. Um, but it's not linear. I mean, certainly for me, if I think about my book launch and my book open for pre-orders just over a week ago now, which is, I don't know, it still feels a little bit strange to think that I'm working on a book, but I'm enjoying it. I'm in the middle of it all now, that sort of messy middle. And there's still aspects of writing and design going on around it. But it's really been nice to have support from people in these early stages. So I'm going down a hybrid publishing route, which is a little bit different from traditional in that I am working with a publisher, but it's me that essentially pays for everything. So I'm covering the publishing costs, I'm covering the printing costs. Um, but the benefit of that is that I've also got full creative control over the book design and the book contents, and there is, decisions to be made and a lot of compromises, but all in a direction that feels good to me. So it's very much, my own project. And that was important to me, I think, to have that um, almost like to have the full intellectual property and, for it um, to be my project. I'm also in control of the timelines and things as well. And it's kind of sits between self-publishing and traditional publishing, and that with self-publishing, I'd have been pretty much on my own, and that wasn't appealing to me at all. So it's nice to be working with 91 editions. Um, this is the first author title that they've worked on outside of their own publications. So, it's been a nice process. But yeah, I feel like I've kind of just emerged from a sort of season of sowing. It's the blossoming time now. I'm out there promoting everything. There's an element of harvesting because the pre-orders are open and people are supporting the project and helping to bring it to life. But then, yeah, I'm looking forward to my wee holiday in a couple of weeks. And I kind of purposefully planned it for after this early pre-launch phase because even though the book doesn't come out till October, and of course people can pre-order it any time between now and then, it was really important to me to focus on a bit of a drive this month, just to give me an idea of the trajectory of
Mhm.
how things might go. looking at numbers and thinking, well, how many do I need to print? And, there's all these kind of decisions that are being made. But hopefully that kind of gives you a flavor for the brand seasons. It's as I say, it's not linear. It's quite abstract in some ways, but the play deck's quite good because it does offer various prompts and practices for strategy, for styling, for storytelling, and is ultimately, there for people to dip in and out of and engage with depending on, what they need, wherever they are in their business.
Yeah. It seems like there's quite a lot of synergy with what I do with etiquette and the T Mind system, which is loosely based on the Chinese five elements, but around the seasons and sort of following that sort of path from sowing and then blossoming, harvesting, etc., where you appreciate and let go, and the fact that it's non-linear. It's sort of, you can go wherever you want within that, whether it's within a project or within a year or within a day or whatever it is. It's sort of using that to as sort of signposts almost, and little points of awareness as well to sort of tune in. And I can see how that's super useful from a sort of brand and creative point of view as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the nicest things about creating it is almost like being able to say to somebody, you don't always need to be on. You don't always need to be marketing and sharing and shouting. And, I think there's a lot of pressure on businesses when it comes to branding, in particular, to be a certain way and do things a certain way. And there's a lot of comparison that crops up. But actually, if you follow your own rhythm, you might see that, do you know what? I just finished launching something a few weeks ago. Why am I going straight back into that cycle again? And, it's okay to not always be in motion. It's okay to stop and reflect on where you are and where you want to go, and if what you're doing at the moment is supporting that. Yeah, certainly. I mean, even for me, whenever I was writing and sharing posts about the concept on Substack, I remember some of the conversations I would have in the comments, and a lot of the time I was saying, I've written this for me too, because, you do have to remind yourself, it's a practice, isn't it, to stay connected, to stay grounded. And so if anything, it's almost just a reminder to soften a wee bit and not always be putting pressure on yourself, to do the next thing, to take the next step in your business. It's okay to reflect and figure out, what's working and what's not.
Yeah, indeed. And I think it's more than okay, because we've seen what happens when we just push, push, push and go for more, more, more. And yeah, we're not built for that. That's not how our rhythms and our seasons and our cycles of our life work. So yeah, the more we lean into that, the better, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
And it sounds like that's something that you've done amazingly well. Sort of, obviously, it's a daily, ongoing practice, as we know. But it's really impressive what you've created for yourself and your family, but also for the people that you work with as well, and all your clients. I wonder what other little rituals or habits that you do. You've mentioned sort of journaling and getting out in nature. Is there maybe one thing that people could take forward this week while they're pausing, whether it's for a cup of tea or coffee or whatever their tipple is this week, that they can use to sort of get that spark back, or just take that little moment to rebalance?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I ran what I call an email retreat recently. It was a series called Brand Camp, and for 6 weeks I sent a weekly email, and we covered everything from vision, values, and voice, right through to visibility, the vibration of our work, and ultimately the viewpoint. And so taking a kind of top-down view over everything. But the first question I asked in week one, and it's coming to me now because I probably got more responses to that email than any other, and specifically about this question. Um, but in thinking about their vision for their business, or their creative practice, whatever the project might be, I'd ask what feels alive for you right now. And I think, it's not what should you be doing? Um, why are you doing such and such? What are you doing next? It's just what feels alive for you right now, what feels good for you right now. And that seemed to really land with people. So I think, yeah, if you're in a kind of stagnant phase or a time where you're figuring out what's next, that might be quite a nice question just to sit with over a cuppa, I think.
That's a lovely one to sit with. Got my cogs turning. I'm conscious of time now. Is there anything that you've got coming up in the future? Obviously, your book launch. I'll put the link to the pre-order in the show notes along with all your details and so on. But yeah, anything else that we've not covered that you wish we'd covered, or anything that you've got coming up in the future?
Well, besides the launch of Shape Your Brand Story, which is the book, there's mainly just a lot going on behind the scenes for me. Continuing to work with clients on their branding projects, and also working on my Substack. I recently rebranded that. It was originally called Brand Seasons to align with the method, but recently changed it to This Creative Life because I just felt I needed something that was more all-encompassing, where I could talk about various parts of my creative practice, and I do some life writing as well. So it felt like a nice space to just honor that multi-hyphenate nature of mine. But yeah, it's primarily the book. That's where all my energy is going, certainly for the next couple of weeks. And yeah, I feel like I almost can't look beyond that right now. But after October, it'll be nice to, yeah, come up for air and see what's next. I'm hoping that it's probably going to be a year of not so much change. I think 2027 will be a fairly calm one. I had a lot on the personal front last year, and this year, yeah, very much just wanted to bring a seed of an idea that's been sitting around for a wee while and, bring that fully to life. And yeah, nice to see that happening now.
Well, I really hope you get the calm year that you deserve. And yeah, I'm so just impressed about all the changes that you've made and really followed your own feelings and your own sort of voice. And it sounds like all these experiences really helped you to sort of understand how your creativity and your energy and your identity and your business can all sort of coexist together in this sort of messy space that is life, without you sort of burning out, and enabling you to keep some sort of balance and harmony in your life as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wonder what you think about success now. Are you successful now?
I think success is based on a feeling and being nourished and fulfilled in your work and believing that you're on the right trajectory, then yes, I would like to say that that's success.
Fantastic. Well, lean into those feelings. And yes, I would encourage everyone to, yeah, when they next pause for their tea, just sit with that question of what feels alive for you right now. That's a great one. So thank you so much for sharing and for being so open and sharing your journey, because I think people listening will have got a lot from it. I know I have. So thank you very much. If something in this episode stayed with you, don't try and change everything at once. Just start with a moment. Make the tea, let it steep. Take a breath and notice what is actually there. And from there, choose what matters next. Because clarity isn't something that we find, it's something that we make space for. This is the Tea Mind. Until next time, take care of your attention.